What if the most important warning about America's naval future was never delivered in Washington? What if it came quietly, decades ago, from a man standing at the edge of one of the world's busiest sea lanes, watching ships pass through a narrow strait that controls the flow of global commerce? Kuan understood something about power that many leaders only discover too late. Great powers don't fall because they lose one battle. They fall because they believe they can fight everywhere at once. And right now, the United States Navy is facing the exact kind of structural dilemma he warned about. This is not a story about decline. It is a story about limits. And limits are far more dangerous than weakness. Picture this. An American aircraft carrier cuts through the Pacific at night. On its deck, fighter jets sit ready beneath red-lit silhouettes. Hundreds of sailors move through corridors below, maintaining systems that must never fail. Radar screens glow, satellite links pulse with encrypted data. Beneath the surface, submarines patrol silently in distant waters. At the same time, thousands of miles away, another carrier operates in a different theater. Destroyers escort commercial vessels in contested corridors. Amphibious groups train with allies. Surveillance aircraft monitor maritime approaches. From the outside, it looks like omnipresence. From the inside, it is arithmetic. And arithmetic does not bend to ambition. For nearly 30 years after the Cold War, the United States operated in what strategists call a unipolar moment. There was no naval peer capable of contesting American sea control on a global scale. The U.S. Navy could deploy where it wanted, when it wanted, largely without fear of symmetrical challenge. Carrier strike groups became floating assurances of stability. Their presence deterred conflict before it started. Sea lanes remained open. Trade flowed. Crises emerged, but they were usually contained within specific regions. The Navy could surge forces without overstretching its core, but history moved forward. Kuan predicted that China would rise, not recklessly, not chaotically, but methodically. He believed the United States would remain powerful, but that its commitments would multiply faster than its structural capacity if it failed to prioritize. He also predicted that the Indo-Pacific would become the defining arena of the century. Now look at the map. The Indo-Pacific alone stretches across half the globe. It contains critical trade routes, strategic choke points, and rapidly modernizing naval forces. Sustaining operations there requires logistics hubs, maintenance access, fuel supply lines, munition stockpiles, and alliance integration. And that is only one theater. Across the Atlantic, European commitments remain central. In other regions, maritime trade routes require escort and presence. Humanitarian crises demand rapid deployment. Emerging Arctic routes add long-term strategic considerations. Each region argues that it cannot be deprioritized. Each presents legitimate risk. Each demands ships. But ships are not infinite. This is where the illusion begins to crack. When the public sees an aircraft carrier on the news, they see the visible portion of power. They see jets launching. They see sailors saluting. They see headlines about deployments. What they do not see is the timeline behind it. Months of training before deployment, months of maintenance after deployment, nuclear reactor servicing that cannot be rushed, aircraft inspections that cannot be skipped, crew rotations that cannot be ignored. One 7-month deployment can tie up a carrier for well over a year when the full cycle is counted. Now imagine overlapping crises. One carrier in the Pacific, another covering Atlantic commitments, a third repositioned because of rising tensions elsewhere. Suddenly, maintenance windows compress, shipyards become congested, training cycles tighten, readiness margins narrow. This does not happen dramatically, it happens gradually. Kuan believed that overextension does not announce itself. It accumulates quietly, beneath headlines, beneath political speeches, beneath public perception. He understood that power is not about visibility, it is about sustainability, and sustainability depends on structure. The modern maritime domain is also more transparent than ever. Satellites track fleet movements. Open source intelligence monitors deployments in real time. Drones extend surveillance range. Reaction windows shrink. Long-range anti-ship missile systems complicate traditional naval maneuvering. Hypersonic research compresses response timelines further. Cyber vulnerabilities intersect with physical systems. Operating in contested waters now requires layered defense, distributed formations, electronic warfare, cyber resilience, and constant doctrinal adaptation. Transformation is underway. Unmanned surface vessels are being tested. Submarine fleets are prioritized. Missile defense networks are expanding. But transformation consumes resources and time, and transition periods are inherently fragile. Lee warned that great powers are most vulnerable not during obvious decline, but during structural adjustment, when old assumptions no longer fully apply and new systems are not yet fully integrated. The Navy is navigating exactly such a moment, still powerful, still dominant in many respects, but stretched by simultaneity. Simultaneity is the real stress. China and the Indo-Pacific, Russian naval activity in Europe, instability affecting maritime trade routes, emerging Arctic positioning. Each scenario alone is manageable. Together, they demand constant readiness. Constant readiness demands maintenance. Maintenance demands industrial depth, and industrial capacity has limits. Warships take years to build. Submarines require highly specialized manufacturing. Shipyards rely on skilled labor that cannot be trained overnight. Supply chains for propulsion systems, advanced electronics, and munitions are complex and sensitive. Kuan believed that economic depth determines endurance. A navy's strength lies not only in ships currently afloat, but in its ability to repair, replace, and sustain them over decades. If operational tempo remains elevated year after year, strain accumulates quietly. Then there is the human element. Ships are steel, navies are people. Extended deployments strain families. Recruitment faces demographic shifts. Retention becomes more challenging when tempo remains high. Fatigue does not show up on satellite imagery, but it shapes readiness. Lee consistently emphasized that institutions are living organisms. Stress appears internally before it becomes externally visible. And here lies the tension. The U.S. Navy remains indispensable. Nearly 90% of global trade moves by sea. Disruption in major corridors would reverberate through energy markets, manufacturing supply chains, and financial systems worldwide. Naval presence stabilizes not only security environments, but economic confidence. Allies depend on it, adversaries calculate around it, political leaders deploy it to signal resolve. But ships cannot be in two oceans at the same time. Being indispensable creates overload risk. Kuan would argue that acknowledging limits is not weakness, it is discipline. If the Indo-Pacific is the primary theater of long-term competition, resources must reflect that reality. If commitments remain evenly distributed across every region, concentration erodes. The era of infinite availability was a product of a unipolar world. That world no longer exists. The question is not whether the Navy can win a battle. The question is whether it can sustain credible deterrence across decades without exhausting its structure. Endurance is the measure, not omnipresence. The fleet remains powerful. Its submarines are formidable. Its carrier aviation is experienced. Its alliances provide strategic depth no rival can easily replicate. But geography has not changed. What has changed is the number of actors operating within it. Kuan understood that great powers must recalibrate before recalibration is forced upon them. Align ambition with capacity. Concentrate where it matters most. Invest in industrial resilience. Strengthen alliances as true multipliers. Adapt doctrine before crisis dictates it. The oceans are vast. The stakes are enormous. The Navy remains central to global stability. But sustainable strength requires recognizing limits before they become breaking points. That is not decline. That is strategic maturity. And that is why the U.S. Navy cannot be everywhere anymore. Not because it lacks power, but because power, to endure, must be focused.